Good morning. Hello. Welcome to day 2 of the Smart Cities Expo World Congress. We had a packed day yesterday, and today we're going to provide you with even more thought-provoking conversation, which I hope you'll take part in. Please do, if you have questions of any of our speakers, please do come up and ask them, because they're all more than willing to engage in this face-to-face interaction, which of course we've been deprived of for so long. Today, we're starting the ball rolling with Mark Major, who's an expert in transport policy development. He's worked in China, in Chile, Morocco, Costa Rica, and the European Commission. And he'll remind us of how critical sustainable urban mobility is for human development and a stable climate. He's currently a senior advisor to SLOCAT here in Spain. And Mark joins us now. Mark.
Thank you. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you today on behalf of the SLOCAT partnership, which is the Partnership on Sustainable Low-Carbon Transport. I should get my slides. Do I have to do something? Okay, we've gone back. Sorry for that. Oof. Okay. I want to talk to you today about the importance of delivering on sustainable urban mobility. I think it's a key moment for that. I'm an advisor with the Partnership on Sustainable Low-Carbon Transport. We're a global partnership that brings together almost 100 members, and we bring together knowledge to lobby for and speak up for sustainable low-carbon transport on the global policy stage. So we're speaking with a single voice in the international policy processes. And I see here today, with us in Barcelona, we have the International Union of Public Transport here, the European Cycling Federation here, Walk 21 here. We're bringing together all the modes. We also have in our partnership many of the think tanks, like WRI, like ITDP, that are working on transport globally. And also we have all the multilateral development banks, so the World Bank, the EIB, the Asian Development Bank, they're all part of our partnership as well. This means that we can speak together with a single voice for the action that is needed on sustainable low-carbon transport. And our principal objective is to have an impact in the global south. One thing we do to support our global advocacy is bring together the massive information that is available about environment and transport into usable information. All of this information is available for you online for free. We have data about transport globally, urban transport, the different regions, the different modes of transport, and we even have a real-time tracker of what countries are saying about their transport policy in their nationally determined contributions. So again, all of these graphics, all of this data, all of this analysis is available for you for free. So please take advantage of that. Okay, I want to give a little bit of context to my presentation. I'm not here only drawing on my work that I do for the SLOCAT partnership, but the work that I've done a lot in the European Union. I used to be the team leader for sustainable urban mobility at the European Commission, but also I've been working a lot in China, Chile, Costa Rica, Mexico, and other countries. So I want to bring this kind of whole perspective to this discussion. And I really believe that idea that if the 19th century was about empires and the 20th century was about nation states, the 21st century is about cities. So I'm really happy that you're here thinking about this topic, and I have the chance to share with you my experience. So the topic we're discussing is crucial. All of us here are working on urban topics, and my perspective on this is cities are machines for accessibility. That's the reason they exist. You pay the costs, the higher price, the hassle of living in a city, because it gives you enhanced access to opportunities, whether that's cultural, social, economic opportunities. I mean, a failing city, if you see a city with congestion or access problems, this is a failing city. So yeah, my whole starting point is that I see cities as machines for accessibility, and we see that sustainable cities are actually essential for the whole topic of human development. So we already have more than half of the global population, over 4 billion people living in cities, and that is rising fast. They're expecting that to be over 7 billion by 2050. That's about a 2 million people a week increase in urban population globally. Just think about that. This is a city the size of Barcelona, growth in urban population on a weekly basis. And lots of those cities are not planned yet. So think about all of that kind of scale of city development that's going to take place in the next 29 years. This is largely a global south phenomenon, the growth in cities in the global south. And please don't forget in this discussion that a quarter of those people are living in slums or informal settlements. So these are people that maybe don't have tenure on their property, they don't have reliable electricity supplies, maybe they don't have clean water. I mean, so it's important to think about the context of urban development on a global scale. And the last part of the background to my presentation is going to be about climate change and the climate crisis. With some of my colleagues, I just spent 2.5 weeks in Scotland at the COP26 working on this topic, on sustainable transport, and I'd like to bring in some of that perspective into this presentation this morning. So yeah, 80% of greenhouse gas emissions come from cities. This is why cities are so central for urban development, human development. And recall the language in the IPCC 1.5 degrees report from earlier in this year. Deep emission reductions are required in all sectors. This requires unprecedented, rapid and far-reaching systemic transitions. Okay, the time for incrementalism is over. You know, and when the UN Secretary General says this is a code red for humanity, hopefully everyone is paying attention. And I know that not everyone here is going to be motivated by tackling climate change. Some of you may be interested in health or equality or economic development or maybe even just profits. But anything you care about is going to be adversely affected by climate change unless you pay attention to it. So I think it's a common topic. So what I've decided to do today is not talk about what we should do for sustainable urban development, because I think a lot has been said about this, and I think we could quite quickly come to a consensus on a vision for safe, clean, healthy, equitable cities with high levels of access for all people, rich, poor, young, old, male and women. So I think we could come to this consensus. So what I want to focus on, based on my experience around the world, is what we can do, is how to deliver it. I think what to do is quite easy, but how to do it is a more challenging question. So I'm going to try and talk about the how to do this. And this brings us to delivering change and the politics and power about delivering change. So the first thing I want to talk about is clarity of vision. I think there's a lot of confusion when people are talking about this topic. And the transition we need for urban mobility and for cities involves organizing thousands of actors, thousands of companies, millions of people, and aligning many, many forces, economic forces, political forces. And this requires a kind of a clear communication of the vision. In the SLOCAT partnership, we sat down together and we've come up with 11 transitions that need to happen to make this transition in transport. And of the 11, 10 of them are directly relevant to cities. Only number 3, which is specifically about rural and interurban mobility, is not relevant. I won't spend a lot of time talking about these, but the message is you can go onto the website, you can read about our 11 transitions. So we're trying to bring our whole partnership to work on these 11 transitions for clarity of message. And this is where you can create momentum and bring people together. So there's a transformation about transport connecting people, cities being compact. There's one about prioritizing walking, cycling, and public transport. There's another transition about managing transport demand. Another transition is the whole electrification, the use of digital technologies to increase access and improve transport efficiency. The whole economic question, aligning prices in investments and economic forces in favor of sustainable transport. Number 9 is about freight systems and having efficient systems, multimodal systems, and low-carbon last-mile delivery. Number 10 is about this whole new economy we need to build, aligning trade and industry and transport to support this local, resilient economies, using recycling and reuse of materials. And the 11th one is the need for systems which are resilient to shocks, so that when there are certain kind of climatic shocks or other kinds of shocks, systems can still function. So nothing that you probably haven't heard in these 11 messages, but we're trying to speak up as a whole partnership very clearly around these 11. So please go on our website, have a look at the key transformations, look at the language and the supporting information. If we can align people as saying these are the 11 transitions we need, will be good. The next one is about setting clear priorities. I mean, there's a lot of people that say good things, and but when you actually look at what they're doing or what they're actually investing in or prioritizing, it's another story. So it's very important to look at actually what priorities people are actually supporting rather than what they say. And I think this is a really important way to cut through the disinformation. So it's important to not only to set sort of clear priorities, but communicate them. And then you support these priorities with your investments and your policies, your legislation. This is an example from Transport Scotland. We had the pleasure to be hosted at several events in COP26 by Transport Scotland. They're doing amazing work. This is their very simple hierarchy they show. You might like it, you might not like it, but at least they're being very specific. And their policy and their investments are following these priorities. So it's not just a graphic, they're speaking up. And politically, that's very brave. Lots of people say good things, but when you actually look what their money's going into, it's a different story. You know, I might say that, you know, I would like to see maybe scooters there that are missing. I might like to see cargo bikes that are missing. But, you know, that's their vision. And I think it's a good example of setting clear priorities. The next thing I wanted to mention is the need for kind of like this framework of avoid, shift, and improve. Any of you working on transport should be familiar with this framework for action. And unfortunately, we spent most of our time in Glasgow talking about just one aspect of improve. So if you think about improving fleets, if you think about improving vehicle operations, improving load factors, improving the design of vehicles, making them more dynamic, maybe making them lighter, making them more efficient. And one aspect of that is the fuels. And one aspect of the renewable fuels is electricity. Unfortunately, in Glasgow, we spent almost all of our time talking about this one micro element of the improve bubble, not about the broader questions of improve, and we spoke very little about shifting to alternative modes of transport and all the strategies that are needed to avoid transport demand. What we know is that to achieve the transformations in transport, we need to put equal effort into the avoid measures, the shift measures, and the improve measures. And it's only with these three areas of actions together that we can make the change. And if we end up only focusing on one sub-element of one of these, we're not going to move forward. Not only because it's incomplete, because I also have concerns that we're not investing in the measures which give us the most value for money. I think we need a much more critical analysis to like, okay, you're going to spend $1 billion or $100 million, make sure you're investing on measures that give you the best value for money. And it's a bit like we seem to rush after one certain topic and not step back and make sure the best choices. I'm relatively optimistic. There's a whole load of things that I've seen here in the exhibition and in the discussion that really can be transformational. I see these as catalytical measures to trigger some of these things. I think this 15-minute city idea is really, really appealing, you know, and that can cover avoid, that can cover shift as well. Bus lanes are a great example of kind of something which improves a mode of transport, makes it more efficient, more revenue, more ticket, more riders, faster, but also makes it more attractive so people might shift from another mode of transport to public transport. So these things, you know, we've seen that with a number of applications here in the exhibition about parking, you know, how these parking charges or tolls or fees can create revenue streams that can be really transformational in a city. We've seen that in London. The transformation in London is not the toll, it's that steady revenue stream which has allowed them to transform street space, transform public transport, transform cycling. These things are really good. So I'm quite optimistic. Now, another mistake that I think is often made is that we kind of make different modes of transport possible. Okay, well, there's now the cycle parking so you can cycle. This is the mistake. It needs to not only be possible, it needs to be preferable. So you need to see it in the broader context, not just possible, but preferable. It's always a bit boring to hear about the same examples. People are always talking about Oslo or Copenhagen, but I mean, the reason people cycle in Copenhagen is because it's the easiest way to get around Copenhagen. It's not because they're committed to their health or the climate or air quality. It's the easiest way to get around. And years of policy and economic policy and land use planning in buildings and investment in infrastructure just make cycling the easiest way to get around Copenhagen. That's why the levels are so high. It's not magic. The next thing I want to talk about is thinking about how do you get politicians to change their minds. I know there's going to be, Ada Kalau is going to be speaking here later. Maybe she's here listening to me. I work on point number one. Many people here do. We're endlessly writing policy papers to send off to politicians to tell them the right things to do, like this is going to magically change the world. But that's not the case. And I'm grateful here to the work done by Professor Julia Steinberger when she's done the kind of analysis. And personal interest is a key thing. Some politicians, they're particularly interested in a particular topic. Maybe they're interested in health, or maybe they're interested in innovation. Everyone has their own interests. And of course, it's useful to know that. Maybe they're interested in just getting re-elected, or maybe they're interested in making money. Who knows? But it's useful to know what their interests are. But that's a useful framing, but not necessarily something you can do much about. But I think where we miss really the real power is number 3 and 4. I used to be a climate negotiator for the European Union, and it's very, very difficult to convince another country to do something that they don't want to do. If they think it's going to be difficult or expensive or complicated, it's very, very difficult. But the thing that makes it very easy to convince someone is when they have positive local experience at home. So I think this is key. People are delighted to talk about something that happened in their town or their city or their own experience. And many of you here are doing pilot projects and investments around the world, and I think this is a key factor. Local action on the ground. This informs the political debate in the country and can inform bolder political decisions. So action on the ground is absolutely key. You don't need huge amounts of money for that particularly. And this brings us on to number 4, which is it's not only doing things on the ground, but talking about them, communicating about them. That's really important too, to make people discuss them, aware of them, aware what works and what doesn't. And this really changes the atmosphere on the ground, and this influences political decisions. So if they have the right policy messages, they're interested, local positive experience, and popular support through the communication, this is a recipe for changing policy. The last thing I wanted to talk about in this part was on systemic transitions. So remember I referred to the International Panel on Climate Change 1.5 degrees report. Don't forget, this is just not another scientific report. It's the global consensus of countries based on the scientific evidence. So it's not just a group of scientists, it's global consensus. And they said that these systemic transitions are necessary. And I think we need to be not only thinking about technology transitions, but I think really important transitions in business models, and I'm happy that in transport we're starting to see business models, the reuse, recycling, more local provision of services, at-home service as well. This is another change in business models which is transforming lifestyles and can transform transport. The sharing economy. These are really promising changes at a systemic level. Also, we need to change the whole economics of transport. The whole economics of transport doesn't make any sense. If you think about road freight in Europe, about half of the external costs of road freight in Europe are paid by society at large. We need to move from society pays to user pays so that the price signals that individuals get encourages them to make a right decision. If you think about the autoroutes in France, those high-quality, safe, energy-efficient roads that run through the countryside in France. No one's living nearby to suffer from the air pollution. If you want to use that road, you have to pay for it. But if you want to drive your old polluting truck onto the périphérique in the center of Paris, that's free. So the whole idea that the price signals, we need to change the whole subject of price signals so that users face a price signal which reflects the cost of society. The whole question of tax-free fuel. Planes get tax-free fuel. This is why if you're in Europe and you try and get a flight, it's much, much cheaper than a train. Okay? Maybe we should be having tax-free fuel for public transport and rail, not for aviation. Until we tackle these systemic problems in the economic flows, economic forces, we're not going to get there. I also think we need changes in decision-making. We were in Glasgow, where the decisions are taken by the consensus of all the countries there, which basically means you're going by the lowest common denominator. There's no voting rules. That's the problem. There's no voting rules. So you spend all night trying to get the consensus, and one voice can block the consensus. So I think we need to have a transition in voting rules. Also, the countries are sitting around the table. These were the UN as it was frozen in time in the 1950s. So there's lots of countries there that you maybe don't even know where they are on the map. But youth doesn't have a seat at the table, cities don't have a seat at the table, civil society doesn't have a seat at the table, and neither do the slum dwellers that I mentioned earlier. I don't see how we can tackle these problems without giving the people that really have the drivers or the interest for change around the table. So I'd like to see a systemic transition in decision making. Yeah. Finally, on the technology, I think this is what people often think about when they think about innovation and change and transition. But I want to see technologies that are affordable for those living in the global south. I want to see ones that are viable at scale. That's another key thing. And also, I'm very concerned that often, like the promise of a future invention that's going to come in the future, actually ends up being an excuse for delaying action now. So let's think about systemic transitions, not just this incrementalism. Now, having said my concerns about technology, this is one of my pet projects. Is I really think the whole story of e-bikes and cycling is possibly is really transformational. If you could invent a medicine that solved heart disease, obesity, air quality problems, climate change, and traffic congestion, you would be paid billions for your invention. We have the bike, and the fact the e-support for bicycles dramatically opens the distances that can be traveled, the type of person that could be involved, and the occasions when they would use it. I think it's a transformational technology. There's a lot of hype about the 10 million cars in the world. We just reached 10 million electric cars. There's at least 500 million electric bikes. These bikes are on the streets, transforming the face of cities. They're affordable, and we just need to make them safe. And this is a way that you can provide increased access to billions of people affordably and efficiently. So this is one kind of technology that I'm really optimistic about. Now, I want to come to the end. I think I have a few more minutes and talk briefly about COP26. Yeah, easy to think that the UN system is like we just sit and wait for the people at the UN to make their decision, decide on their level of ambition, and then we get on and delivering it. That's not the reality at all. I really think there's a much closer link between ambition and action on the ground. It comes back to what I said to do about local positive experience. So everything that you guys are doing on the ground in projects, in experiments, in tests, in exhibitions is really important because this action that we're taking on the ground, this actually informs the next level of ambition that we'll take in the UN process. So please don't think that this slow-moving UN process is nothing to do with you. Everything you're doing to have discussions with your clients, with your customers, with your providers, everything you do is changing the political atmosphere, which creates a new political atmosphere for the next level of political decisions. Those high-level decisions actually reflect the reality on the ground more than you think. So yeah, so as I said, action on the ground and communicate it about them. And this way we can get this 5-year cycle of the Paris Agreement. We'll be having new commitments every 5 years. And what is important that they increase over time so that 2025, 2030, we have the increasing ambition. Yeah. A number of us were there for 2 long, hard weeks of work, working every day on activities, ministers' meetings, receptions, interviews, reports, project meetings, campaigns, presentations, doing work on social media, etc. And I'm very proud that the SLOCAT partnership is a focal point for the transport community in the UNFCCC process. So there we're working to engage the whole transport community in the UNFCCC process. And if you're interested in the hundreds of things that were going on there, take a look at our website, where we'll also be uploading some reports on what came out of that. Yeah, so as I said before, don't forget that the problem with the UNFCCC process is there's no voting rules. So it's not like you listen to good ideas and then you vote for the one that is best. You have to find consensus. And this is paralyzing. And as I say, any one country can block progress. And also don't forget that the texts there, they're not legally binding. And there's no enforcement. So it's not like here in Europe where you make a law, the law is enforced. If you don't comply with it, you get taken to court and you're fined. That's not the case. The rules there are not legally binding and there's no enforcement mechanism. But I'm still extremely optimistic because we see there that at COP we take a step forward. We see a much clearer focus on transport and cities. We see the youth activism driving things. I'm impressed by the number of business commitments. When Walmart and Unilever and Nestle commit, that's transformational as well. Show me a ship or show me a warehouse in the world that isn't carrying something for Walmart or Nestle or Unilever. These commitments go deep. Also, we see the changes in how the financial system is working. Of course, you can say that there's not enough progress at one meeting, but I've been to 10 of these meetings and I'll be going to 10 more probably, but it's a sense of progress and And the other thing that gives me a great sense of optimism is the groundswell of actions that you hear about at COP. There's just so many fantastic people with fantastic ideas doing things on the ground. No one controls that, and no one can stop it. It's really heartwarming. And some of those are going to go through, and those solutions and ideas will be... And then people often say to me, okay, was it a success or a failure? Are you optimistic, pessimistic? I just say, well, I'm determined. You know, it could have been better, but it could have been worse. At least we're meeting after 2 years of no meeting. So I'm just determined, and I'm going to carry on with my determined. The last thing I want to say before we come to the end is this, like, there's a tremendous kind of pessimism, like, oh, this is so difficult and it's going to take so long. Okay, if we could go from the first powered flight in 1903 to the first person on the moon in 1969, that's like 66 years. If we could do that in 66 years, I think we absolutely can move from like chaotic use of urban space to kind of ordered, prioritized urban space, or even from one type of high-energy liquid jet fuel to another type of high-energy liquid jet fuel, or from trucks to rail freight. You know, absolutely we can do this in 29 years. And don't believe anyone who says that this is not possible. So I hope these comments are useful in your work, and that these reflections give you some new insights on how you might be able to advance your activities. Thank you for your attention.
Why don't you take a seat, Mark? Thank you very much indeed, and have a glass of water. So, Mark, they're packing an agenda there. I'm sure that you've got some questions for him. Please come forward to the mics that are in the aisles, and let's hear your questions. He gave you so much to think about. And are you as optimistic as Mark? Because despite all of that, you heard him say, he still retains a certain element of optimism. So let's get underway. Mark, let me start with you, seeing as we haven't got anybody brave enough yet to ask a question. Let me start by asking you about, I wonder, is this far away enough? Yes, I think so. So smart city thinking. Smart thinking has been around for what? 10 years, it's been around for some time. What practical implementation are you seeing on the ground today?
Okay. I didn't have a lot of chance to visit the exhibition in this morning, but yeah, I just see all these, I mean, there's a lot of resources, a lot of smart people, and I think if these resources and effort are being focused on these big transitions that I spoke about, the 11 transformations, I think if that's the case, then that's really optimistic. I mean, I guess some of them will fail, but my concern is that it ends up being, and this was also the case in Glasgow, is that it ends up being a kind of a rich North person's perspective. It's expensive to travel to these events. You know,
Sure.
They're often held in the global north. It was extremely expensive to be in Glasgow. So you end up with a certain type of person and a certain type of thinking that influences it. And that doesn't necessarily reflect the reality of what is happening in cities around the world, which is why I tried to mention the global south perspective.
Absolutely.
And the number of slum dwellers.
What I also picked up from your presentation was the fact that these transitions that are absolutely necessary require quite complex collaboration. And the very word transitions almost implies quite timely processes. And yet, the fact is, Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, has emphasized time and again that it's got to happen now, not soon, not in the near future, but right now. How can those collaborations be speeded up so the transitions become shorter and change happens now?
Well, I mean, you know, I spend a lot of my time in these kind of events, and I think talking, listening, exchanging is a key part of it. I think the fact that kind of financial flows are really taking this is a way to bring people together and concentrate effort, so I think this is the case. But I tried to give some examples of what I call these catalytic measures, which can really change things. So I mean, some things will take time to develop, new relationships, new projects, new partnerships, new projects, new technologies will take a time, but there is a number of things that can take place on the ground. And I mean, politics is part of this. I mean, city leaders have, you know, like those decisions about equitable use of space, those decisions about priorities. I mean, this is in the hands of elected politicians. And they can create the enabling conditions, importantly, for a lot of the other things to go faster. So I mean, of course, if you're lobbying and you're trying to get changes in public policy to make your thing work, that's hard. But if the politicians lead, I think this can create the space for some of these solutions to flourish.
Now, you've also spent quite a lot of time in the global south, and of course we know that this is where the problems that we're all facing are particularly acute. Cities like Lagos in Nigeria, the biggest city in Africa, I read the other day that there are 4 people coming to Lagos, this sprawling mass, every minute. So you can imagine, and this was a city that was built for something like 800,000. It's now about 15 million people. And as you pointed out, most of them living in slums. What does Lagos do? What does Lagos need? What do the cities of sub-Saharan Africa need to do as they address these growing problems?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. I wouldn't want to be in their shoes. But what I say to them is they need to be thinking clearly. I think I see a lot of confused thinking. A lot of my work, I go to a country or a city around the world, and they're spending billions on planning or on construction or operation of systems, but they don't have a clear policy objective. When you try and ask them what they're trying to achieve, they get like a real confusion about, whether it's about air quality or it's about, they're very confused. And so actually helping them to have a clear policy is key, and that's one of the things we want to achieve with these 11 transformations, is that we've tried to work collectively with our knowledge of our global partnership to try and crystallize the changes that need to take place. Of course, they need to be adaptive for certain circumstances and certain preferences, but we've tried to come up with these 11 macro transitions to help people kind of have some clarity in their work. And then the investments make sense because they can be aligned.
Clarity of message seems to me to be quite an important element of this entire process. How do you sharpen the message? Because you alluded to confused thinking. How do you sharpen the message so that it's understood more broadly? There are people in Kenya, for instance, who are suffering the terrible effects of climate change, but have no idea what the changing weather patterns are attributed to.
Yeah. So, I mean, when I talk about the transformations, I mean, we're talking about for policymakers, yeah? So our transitions are not necessarily messages to people that are kind of on the ground. So I think, there's lots of forces on policymakers. They often don't have the best advice, or they have distorted advice. So, I think our effort is to try and kind of crystallize these transitions clearly so that they're available to everyone for free. You can challenge them. Maybe you go on our website and you don't like it. That's fair. But we've worked hard to try and have set them out clearly.
All right, Mark Major, I've taken up enough of your time, and I can see that none of you are bold enough to come forward with any questions. I hope that changes throughout the day. Anyway, Mark, thank you so much indeed. That was really interesting, and good to have you here.
Thank you very much.